Okay, so this is Drawing Lab. We're going to work on a perspective house, and we've got some drawings of a house here. We've got a front elevation, and we've got a side elevation, and we're mostly going to use those to figure out how to draw this house. We're going to draw it in 2-point perspective, though. So the first thing we need to do is lay in a horizon line. I like to lay my horizon line in about 2/5 above, 2/5 into the page. That seems to be a good place for me to put it in. And you're going to want to mark your vanishing points really towards almost at the very edge of your paper. In real life, they're probably a bit further out in terms of the normal field of vision for a human, but that's going to work out for us. And then around the middle, I'm going to drop in a big vertical line, and that's going to be the corner of the house. So this is just kind of marking out the perspective of the viewer. That's the center of my field of vision, and those are my 2 vanishing points. And I need to kind of work out how tall the house is. It's I sort of divided the box of the house into 2, and then the roof was like a little more than another one of those units. So it was like 3 and a little bit units high of the unit. There's 1 unit there that I'm marking out. And then I'm going to take my house and I'm just going to draw the box that the house is. So those units, by the way, I just made them up. I was like, this is a way to divide up the house. I'm going to try to draw a little darker than I normally draw for my layout line so you guys can see what I'm doing here. But I'm just drawing in the vanishing points. That's the height of my box. That's not the roof. That's just the height of if you took the roof off the house and it was just a box, that's the height of it. And then I'm establishing like, okay, I think that looks about right for the width. And then it's about 2/3 of its front. The side is about 2/3 of its front side. So I kind of just estimated those sides and sort of made up a box. There are technical ways you can measure this. I'm not doing this. This is just kind of like a quick eyeball-y thing. And now I'm going to divide these faces into fourths. So I'm dividing the faces of the actual house into fourths so that I can kind of see what falls in and around those lines. I'm just using them as guidelines. And then I'm going to divide this into fourths in perspective, though. So I do that by attaching the corners and then drawing a line, right? A vertical line right there. So that is my halfway point. I connected the corners and then drew a line where those points intersected. And then I do that again at the halfway point. So I get a vertical line where those where those 2 lines intersect when I draw corner to corner. And now I've divided this rectangle in perspective into fourths. And I can use those guidelines to kind of figure out where the windows and the doors go and things like that. And I numbered them here just to help clarify it for you. And you can go ahead and do that as long as you erase them later. It's fine. And I'm going to do the same thing on the side elevation. I'm going to divide that into fourths. And you can see, like, I'm going to use where those lines kind of cross the windows to figure out how to put the windows in. Okay, so now I've got that box kind of neatly divided up. So that's the box of my house in perspective, divided up into some fourths. So I've got a lot of guidelines that I can use to figure out where things are. Now the top line of windows is pretty much in line with the top of the box. And then I need to figure out where the other windows are. So if I kind of divide the house in half, that right there, well, this one right there, this in thirds, that line that I'm drawing right there, this line here, that's going to be around the bottom of my windows. And then this line here is going to be around the bottom of my other windows. And I'm adjusting that line. I don't quite like where they are, so I've decided that those 2 lines right there, that's actually where my windows sit. And I've raised that 1/3 mark there to be sort of, that's my window line right there. That's my first story windows. And those are my second story windows right there. And those lines are going to continue around the house to make the line of the windows on the other face of the house. The windows are roughly in line on each side of the house. And now I'm trying to figure out where my door goes. My door goes in the middle, but it's got this pediment, so I'm just working out the rough height of my pediment. I don't know why I put those 1/3 divisions there. They're useful for the top windows, but not the bottom ones. So that's a little confusing that I've got those 1/3 guidelines in there. So now I've drawn my pediment, but I realize I don't really know how wide my pediment is. So I'm going to block in all the windows to sort of figure out where the window intersects the pediment, so I can figure out if the pediment's the right width. And I'm going to erase some guidelines as I go to try to make it clear, because I'm putting my guidelines in relatively dark so that you guys can see what I'm doing. I'm going to have to erase them as I go so it doesn't get too confusing. That window there exists on that side of that dividing line, so I'm going to block that window in. And remember, in perspective, the windows would appear, the width is going to decrease as it moves away from you. And then that other window kind of exists in the middle of that last 1/4 dividing mark. So I got those windows in, and then I'm going to put, that's the edge of that window, and it comes in towards the center window like that. Trying to make sure everything makes sense, just guessing on the perspective, but using a lot of guides to kind of get there. And that's my final window in that space. Okay, and you drop those verticals down, and that's going to give you the positions of the windows on the first floor. So you've got those guiding lines that you made for the windows. All the windows exist between these two lines, and then you just kind of make everything match up. Taking the time to draw the guides in to make sure that the windows match up is what's going to make the house look nice and clean. I am not using a straight edge for most of these lines because this is a good way to practice getting good at drawing a straightish lines freehand. If you're unable to do that, you can go ahead and use a ruler, but if you use a ruler too much, it's going to look very, very mechanical, and I do want some character. I want you to learn how to put some character into your sketches. Here I'm just kind of mapping out how the door sits, and there's some tricks here. I do use a ruler sometime. Here I've noticed that the doorway, actually, if you look at the side elevation, the doorway juts out from the house a little bit. So I'm using some perspective lines to pull the doorway out, just like a foot or so from the side of the house. Now I'm putting the molding in. If you look at the drawing, you can see there's like a little band of trim that wraps all the way around the bottom of the house. And that's going to help me draw the little stoop that the doorway sits on. So I'm kind of figuring out where that goes, and it's got like 2 bands wide. This image, by the way, is in your Blackboard folder for the class, and I'll drop it into the Discord server as well. And I'm adding in a little step here. It's like a small step and then a bigger stoop. This thing sits on, or a bigger stoop and a small step. So I'm putting the stoops in. Check the elevation, check the drawing. It's great if you can print this out. You can sort of see it's wide there. And I'm using, keep referencing that drawing so you can figure out what's there. There's my stoop, and then there's a little sort of step coming off of that gets you into the house. I actually find it hardest to eyeball small things sometimes. That's why I'm using the ruler a lot on the steps. The doorway has a lot of trim in it, so I'm kind of figuring out how to indicate that with simple lines. simplify it a little bit. So there's my doorway, and next I'm going to move into defining some details in the windows. So I'm putting a little ring of trim showing the window frame essentially on each of these windows. So now as I'm finishing up these windows, I'm putting in a little recess and then kind of blocking in where the little the muntins and mullions are the little dividing things in the window. So there's going to be like a little recess there where the window cuts into the house, and then the muntins and mullions would be sort of offset from the window because they're behind it. So it's not quite exactly in the middle. It's starting to look like a house now. A house with no roof. Box house. Box house is boxy. We'll give it a roof later. Now's a good time to mention there's this little sort of extension, kind of greenhouse, library room looking thing on the side of this house. And if you feel like you're up to the challenge of drawing that, I'm going to show you how I draw it here in the tutorial, but you can just add in a bay of windows underneath it and not draw that whole little box extension on the side of the house if you want to keep it simple for yourself. And we essentially here have got most of the details in for this side of the house. Now we're going to look at that extension you just said. You don't have to draw that. Now we're going to look at this, the return of the house here, and lay out those windows. So that line of windows is going to continue around from the front. So that's that line of windows. And you can see the middle point there is almost, but not quite, in the middle of that bank of two windows. So I'm going to kind of block in where those are. And then that other window, the edge of it is on that dividing line, and then it goes back from that. My lines aren't perfect here. This is an exercise to sort of understand it. So I do, please don't use a straight edge for everything. Try to learn to do some of this stuff on your own. So I need to get the roof in to get the final two windows in. So I'm extending that midline, that midpoint line up, and I'm kind of measuring it here. It's like a little more than, if the bottom box is 2 units high, it's a little more than 1 more unit high. So that unit high, and then like a little bit above that. So I get that point, and then I just connect the dots, and I've got the little A-frame of that house there. And I'm using my straight edge to take that line back towards the vanishing point because it's a pretty steep line. And in a bit, I'll come in and I'll block in where the edge of that roof starts. But I just need this point for now so I can figure out where the windows go. So I'm figuring out within that point where the windows are sitting, and running 2 lines from my vanishing point out to give me the sort of like area that my windows sit in, and then they sit equidistant to either side of that line. Now, equidistant to either side of the midpoint in perspective is not actually an equal measurement. It'll be further, it'll be a bigger space on the side of the line that's closer to you, and a slightly smaller space on the side of the line that's further from you. You probably won't notice the difference, but there is a difference. Again, if you're not putting the little extension on, just draw another set of windows just like this, or just like the ones on the second floor, not these like attic level windows, on the in the space below you that line up with the windows from the first floor. You can just do that simplified version. And I'm doing the little drop shadow, the little recess for the windows. There's that window with its trim and its little recess. And this one is a little more tricky. I'm putting the muntins and mullions in. Now doing that over here too. clean up some of those lines. Put my window frame in. Figure out exactly how that works with the double window. And the little recess lines in. Okay, now we're gonna look at the roof line. We've got this little entablature that kind of pseudo wraps around the little corner of the house, this big blocky trim. And the roof sort of overhangs. You see, I'm drawing the overhang of the roof. It overhangs on these sides, but it also juts out like, I don't know, say a foot. So that's that little 1 foot extension from the side of the house. So I'm drawing that in. And that's a little 1 foot extension. And I'm putting that over here as well. And then I'll kind of connect these lines, and I'll have to erase a good bit too. And that line is going to go back to that vanishing point on that part of the house. And you see that cuts off the top of those windows. And you wouldn't see that because the roof would be overhanging them. So there's kind of my guesstimate of what that overhang would look like, and I'd overhang to there. And now I have to do something that's like a little bit tricky here. I'm gonna have to figure out where the roof line stops, and in order to do that, I'm gonna have to draw in the back half of my cube, the sort of the side of the house that you can't see. To figure out where the center of that is, basically the corresponding side to the side that's showing, and use the midpoint of that to get that. And I'm procrastinating on that by drawing this lovely little pillar here on the side of the house. And that's in the original sketch. You can see there's little kind of columny things going up the side of the house. So now I am figuring out where the back square of my house is. You could have done this from the get-go, and that might have been a little bit easier because you need to know where the middle of that back square is going to be so you can figure out where the roof pitch stops. So right now I'm kind of doing some lightweight perspective lines to kind of connect that all. So I need to figure out where that line, that wall that we can't see, where that recedes, and it intersects that point there I've made, and that's the back corner of the house right there. And I'm just double checking my work here, make sure I've taken everything to the right vanishing point. That makes sense. That makes sense. There would be a line there that would connect those 2 points. That would be the back little rectangle of the house. So if I connect those diagonals, diagonal, it crosses somewhere there in the middle of the door, and pull that up, that gives me the point of the pitch of the roof. So I just did a bunch of work to kind of estimate where the center of that wall that you can't see, that the other side of the wall of the house, the other side elevation would be. Basically, same thing we did on the other side, you're just doing it where you can't see. And we have to erase some of these windows because the overhanging roof kind of cuts some of it off. Is that 100% true to the drawing? No, but we're putting it in. Now I'm giving this roof some thickness and some trim. You can see in the elevation it's got some personality, character, thickness, sort of giant raking cornice type thing. This is a colonial style house, by the way. 5 bays is a pretty typical Georgian style house in the Americas. They usually have 2 chimneys though. one on either end, like little angry ears on a house. Adding some lines to that stuff gives it some character. Now I'm just kind of giving these columns that come down the side some character. I'm actually going to end up erasing most of this because I am going to put this little library extension balcony bit in on this side. But if you're not doing that, you would need to put all these lines in. Okay, so now let's look at this like little library extension thing. We can only just see how big it is from the plans there. That shows us it's a solid at the first floor level, and it's kind of a balcony at the second floor level. So I'm marking in it's about that wide on the plan. So I need to draw those lines out so that it comes out into space from that vanishing point. And then figuring out how wide it is. It's a little more than 1/4 of the house wide. So I'm using that as a guide to sort of pull that out. Give it its verticals. So it's basically just think of it as a cube, and then you break down the cube into more complex forms. Figuring out where the top line of it is there. It's right in line with those windows, really, the top line of it. So we'll take that. Along the back. And then the front edge is going to come along that line there. Front edge, and then that receding away from you. Just getting the box in. It can be confusing at this point because you end up with like a lot of lines. So if you've got more lines than you need, you got lines that you're done using, erase them. So there's the top edge of my little extension. And it's got, I think, 3 windows on one side and 8 on the other. So I'm gonna have to do some fancy divisions here to show you how that's done. So that I'm kind of drawing a little trim line in for my windows. There's a lot of windows on this, and I'm not going to be super precise in drawing them in. I'm going to get the gist of them in. So you can just eyeball this 3, but if you want to do it right, you make your X, draw your vertical line, and then draw from one corner all the way. You make this little kind of V in there, and then where those lines cross, you can see where I've drawn from the middle out to the corner. Where those lines cross the big X lines gives you your 1/3. 1/3. You can look that up too, of how to divide a box into thirds, real simply with some lines, if that evaded you. Now I've got 8 windows along here, and I'm just going to divide it into fourths the same way I did everything else, and then just put 2 windows in each section because I'm not being super, super precise here. Draw my big X, and continue dividing that into fourths just like we did the other part of the house. There's like a bit of paneling that sits underneath the window, so I'm drawing kind of the rough line of where that paneling is so I can get the relative heights of the windows before I start drawing them in. Now I'm looking at the balcony level, and I'm just kind of drawing in the railing. The balcony has like some big pieces And I'm kind of figuring out, all right, it's sort of the top of the balcony, sort of in line with the bottom of those windows, and where would that sit? And how tall would that be? And there's like big posts of the balcony and then like some little posts that connect them. And I'm just going to loosely sketch those in. I'm going to make sure I get the big pillars in the right area. But there's four, luckily, four big pillars. This area is divided into four, so I can just use the lines I've already got to kind of block those pillars in and erase some of the windows behind. And I'm just loosely sketching in those things, just kind of scribbling that in because I don't need to define the detail of each single one of those. And back to the windows. 8 windows on that little rectangle. And there roughly is your finished house. You can tweak the details if you want to. I'm going to go ahead and ink this just to kind of pop it out, but I'm going to speed that track up quite a bit.